All right. Welcome everyone to this masterclass. I think because of time, I know we are 5 minutes behind. I'll invite the speaker of the day to take it away, and the rest of the other team members who haven't joined will meet us. So to introduce the topic and take us through the entire session, it's going to be Herbert, Thuo, one of our colleagues from ANSA, and I want to take this opportunity to just give him the chance. Herbert, feel free to share your screen and take it away.
All right, thank you, Emmanuel. Hopefully you can hear me loud and clear.
Yes, I can hear you. I hope the rest can.
Yes, so maybe what you could do, just give me rights to share my screen.
Dan, you can be able to share your screen now, Herbert. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. As introduced by Emmanuel, thank you so much for this opportunity, and it's great to meet all of you. My name is Herbert Thuo, and working together with the HTHA team, we've been working on these master classes to make sure that we can not only provide you with information that you can use for the next stages of your health tech, but also provide you with some insights that you can use almost immediately, as you've realized from your experience throughout Masterclass 1. We're very much action driven and impact driven in the sense that we want to make sure that you're able to execute and implement as well. So today we move on to Masterclass 2, which is focused on go-to-market. And a big part of the go-to-market journey is thinking about, everything that we did in Masterclass 1, how do we actually take it to market? Because it's one thing to come up with innovations, it's one thing to, come up with great ideas, but commercialization, and that, is a big problem. We've seen that, throughout the last 5 years or so, where we have great innovations that are just not able to make it to market. We want to address this. And of course, this is a short summary. A lot of this is available in your info packet on Babel, so you'll be able to go through that in a lot more detail. But what I want to do is walk you through some of the highlights, some of the areas that you should spend a bit more time on, just because they form a critical part of the journey that we are on. In terms of what you can expect throughout the Masterclass 2, we look at three big items. We look at pricing and how to develop pricing, how to evaluate what kind of pricing you have. We'll also look at go-to-market, storytelling, and ESG. And lastly, we'll look at how to integrate technology into your health tech, and not so much in terms of technology to power your health tech, because that's a big core of what you guys do, but how to use it in terms of go-to-market, and specifically looking at CRMs and how we can take advantage of the plethora of tools that are at our disposal. But before we jump in, I just want to do a short recap, maybe just 2 minutes, to recap how we got here, because it's important that we contextualize where we are at the moment. We began Masterclass 1 by looking at a mindset shift, and we asked ourselves the question, how do we need to start thinking about how we position ourselves in the market? And we talked about the idea of moving away from product type thinking to persona obsession. We use the word persona obsession intentionally because we really want to focus on the problems that are being faced by our customers, our personas. And we spent some time looking at different scenarios and thinking through how do we change our focus away from the technology to the people behind the technology, in a sense. And Wilfred, who took us through this last time, spent a bit of time looking at that. The next thing we did, and this will be, again, you've seen this is now consistent across everything that we do, is we built a case study that we will use throughout the classes. Just to remind you, our case study is Abina, who, we're trying to figure out how to move her away from self-medication or reduce the impact that she's experiencing from self-medication And we've been using this as a contextual basis to provide you with learning opportunities across the masterclasses, right? So again, what we try to do is understand her pain points, where she's coming from, her motivations, why she thinks the way she does. So again, if you'd like, you can always go to your info packet. You'll find a lot more information on Abina there. We then spend some time looking at empathy and trying to think about, the things that are not on the surface. Remember, as a product developer, as a business owner, as a person thinking about deploying products and services to market, you have to go below the surface, because often what you get from speaking to customers sometimes, or profiling them, is usually on the surface. You need to go a lot deeper. And if you remember from some of the videos that I walked you through, you might have seen me in some of those videos. I talked about the idea of, if you're not able to answer this slide, it is a great opportunity to go back to those same customers and gain a deeper insight, get a deeper relationship with them, so that you're able to attack these questions. Because often, and this is what we're now seeing from research, is if you're not able to figure this slide out, potentially you may be in trouble in the long term. We then built a product and service offering. We looked at it across three levels. So we had a core offering, we had some benefits, and an augmented offering as well. And the idea being is that we wanted to make sure that we tackle all the pain points, all the motivations, all the reasons to switch identified during problem definition, right? And again, all this is available in your info packet as part of your Masterclass 1. And then coming towards the end, we then thought about the customer journey, and we said, we're going to think about it across 4 levels. We're going to think about it, what's going on at discovery, pre-purchase, after discovery, during consumption, and then post-purchase, because typically this is how your customer will be thinking. And we talked about the idea of, trying to distinguish again between B2B, B2C, but also, and this is important, thinking about the persona in different levels, because you might have a buyer who is not a consumer. So just food for thought there. Careful that we don't design products and services for buyers when we are thinking about consumers, and consumers when we're thinking about buyers. We just need to be wary of that one, because you can end up, spending millions, and we've seen this in practice when you're really talking to the wrong person. So just food for thought there along customer journey. And then we talked about the idea of unfair advantages, because again, we're not on an island. There are other folks thinking about the problems that we're thinking about. But we said, how can we create some unfair advantage that makes the market take notice and react to others? And we talked about 7 different types. And in the assignment, the plea was to try and identify 1 or 2 that you can start working on if you don't have one yet. And we had the 7 that you're seeing there. And lastly, we then looked at ethics. Again, we are in an industry that requires us to look at ethics with a different lens. And as such, there was in your assignment packet an ethics map that just helps you think through different facets of how we can deploy ethics in a very simple way, but something that we can do almost immediately. And the hope that this has been useful as you start your journey.
Herbert,
So, yes.
sorry to interrupt you. Just a quick one.
Yes.
Do you mind moving close to your mic? I think there is a comment that someone could probably be having a challenge hearing you.
All right, let me just fix that real quick.
Okay.
Yeah, so hopefully this should be a lot better, just in terms of, I've just changed my mic. So hopefully that's a lot better, but just let me know in case it's not clear. So let's jump in, let's get started into a Masterclass 2. And the first thing we're going to look at is pricing, specifically looking at how to develop pricing, and also how to think about business model assumptions creation, because sometimes when you're looking at pricing, you sort of hand in hand thinking about your business model. And In order to get this right, I just want to spend a few minutes talking about some reflections, um, and something that you need to think about as well. And the data is now telling us that more than half of all startup product failures are sort of centered around pricing. That should be a wake up call because pricing is such a fundamental sort of area around go to market. You can come up with great innovations, great products that actually have really good product market fit, but you get pricing wrong, then ultimately you are not able to grow and scale. And as we jump into masterclass 4 and 5, you'll understand, when we talk about scale, you'll see how critical a role pricing plays, right? So just food for thought there. Then in terms of just why it matters, right? So we've talked about longevity. We of course want to be here for the long run. But you can see there, a number of facets that touch on pricing and why it's critical. So whether it's coming up with your cost structure or figuring out your value proposition, because sometimes your value proposition is brought out by your pricing. Price too low, you position yourself a certain way. Price too high, you position yourself out of the market. So just food for thought around how we can use pricing. There's also market analysis. Of course, you really need to make sure that, as you come up with your pricing, you're not on an island. So what are your competitors doing, right? And you need to really spend some time understanding their business model, how they're pricing, and getting it maybe even sometimes from the customers in terms of their perception on that pricing. You might find that, the customers are not happy. That's an opportunity for us. So until you have sort of do that analysis, you'll never really be able to see, to plot where you are versus maybe everybody else. Of course, your persona, you need to be cognizant about the economics around your persona. There's no point saying we are targeting a persona that is below the pyramid, but then you price yourself out of it. You need to be cognizant of different structures of pricing, different levels of pricing that we'll talk about shortly. I've talked about positioning, but there's also ultimately you need to look at your own business because you again don't want to price in a manner that makes you unsustainable. And we've seen this a lot where, just for penetration purposes, you'll find some enterprises will price so low that they're just not made, able to make their own budgets, and that would be a shame, especially after you've spent so much time recruiting customers. So you need to be cognizant about your own economics as well, because you've got some fixed costs that you can do nothing about at the moment, right? We've talked about sustainability. There's also distribution channels that give you an opportunity to think about pricing differently. In 2024, we have a myriad of options of how to go to market. So for example, if you're looking at e-commerce as an option, you can imagine that influences not just your pricing, but your margins as well. And then thinking about all the partners along the supply chain as well. And then the last one I want to talk about here is regulatory compliance. Now, depending on what subsector you are within sort of the healthcare space, there may be a regulatory compliance component that affects your pricing. There's no point saying that you're outside that, you have to factor that in. And that's why overall, when we talk about the idea of pricing, these are some of the aspects that we must consider as we think about how we go to market. So if we just talk about the four main components that make up pricing. So as you're thinking about developing pricing, there are four big areas to think about. So the first one is around objectives. And this is based around, your business. Where do you want to go? In terms of, is it penetrative pricing? You're just coming into the market that is crowded. You want to try and find your niche. Is it seasonal? Is it based on, for example, when there's an explosion of a disease, for example? Is it based around World Bank project funding? So all these aspects will sort of, affect how you think about pricing. The second one is your strategy. And this is where it is the framework, really. It's sort of the bedrock of your business model. And will be based on each product. You might have multiple products, each might have a different strategy, and we'll look at a few shortly. And then for structure, price structure, sometimes you might find it might be one price, but for two personas, it might be structured differently. One might be, for example, pay as you go, and another one might be outright. So you just need to think about, again, in terms of your persona, where is their comfort level. Remember, you're not doing this based on just purely your perception or your perspective. You want to try and factor in your persona's perspective as much as possible. And then this last one, which I really like personally, is price levels. This is where we think about going to market as a matter of like a staircase, where you start at the bottom and you go all the way to the top. I call it the ladder of products or the ladder of pricing. We'll look at that shortly. It's where you get your customer in at the lowest possible level and you grow them over time. So this is where sometimes you hear words like lifetime value. This is where we factor that in. So again, I just talked about lifetime value, and sometimes you may be underpricing, especially for some of us who have already launched, already out there in the market. You might want to consider some signs that you may be underpricing. The two I want to spend some time on is, of course, lifetime value. You can see there, I've circled it there, lifetime value and cost of acquisition. But the second one is this second piece here around once you close the deal, if it's B2B, if it's B2C, so as you bring on customers, they are so surprised when they look at the amount of value they're getting and they can't believe that it's priced as it is. And that sometimes is a clear tell sign that you're underpricing. And you can do this when you do a survey. You'll sometimes get feedback of customers saying, I can't believe this is that price. Is there a catch? Is there more? The second piece is on lifetime value or lifetime customer value. If your lifetime customer value is lower, than your cost of customer acquisition, that's a clear tell sign. Your cost of acquisition is the total cost to bring a customer in. This is especially used when you're talking about sort of e-commerce related service provision, but you can use it in almost any setup because sometimes we need to calculate every little cost to bring a customer in. And sometimes if we're not tracking that cost, we might be very happy with the revenue we're making. However, you might find that your lifetime value is not commensurate, and that's not good. It doesn't help us with any sustainability goals. Just to talk about a few strategies of pricing, some of which you guys have already deployed, but again, you can go into the info packet and you find a lot more detail on these. So these are some of the strategies that some of you are already deploying. This was also based on just an outlook of some of you and some of the things that you're doing, and some elements that may be a little different, especially for some of you who are not in B2C, who are deploying sort of a B2B model, or are deploying a hybrid of both B2B and B2C. So again, just in terms of the pricing strategy, something to note is that you can actually have more than one, right? And we'll look at that when we're talking about pricing levels, because at one point you can have freemium where you're bringing customers in for a little bit and you want them to sample, you want them to taste, you want them to feel the product, and then you charge them later. But then have an element of loss leader as well. This is very common, for example, in the telecom space, but also can be applied in our area as well. So just a reflection from your end, if you've not had time to do this, this is a great time to think about it, is which pricing strategy works for your portfolio. So if you only have one product at the moment, fantastic. But if you have a portfolio, it gets a lot more complex. What pricing strategy works for your product portfolio? So just food for thought. It's something that maybe you can reflect on if you haven't already. And again, you also can just go into the info packet where you'll find a lot more information on this. The second piece around pricing is revenue and generating revenue lines. And this is really where the rubber meets the road in terms of figuring out the different levels of pricing that you may want to deploy even for a single product. So just to give you an idea, is at the most basic level, at the bottom of the ladder, you may actually have a free product, something that brings the customer in, gets them to sample the product, to taste the product, to feel the product, to see the benefits. And then as you go higher up, you're incrementally providing additional services of the same product. So just to give you an example, again, just using Abina, you can see that's our case study there. We have 3 levels or three ladders. We've got core revenue line. This is our basic product. We have a subscription fee to access our platform. Just to remind you, our company is called Concern Health. That's our case study company that's providing this service to Abina. But then as you go up, we've got secondary revenue lines. Again, we're adding value to the same product. We're not creating new products. And so we've got, for example, personalized health coaching, we've got virtual pharmacy, we've got premium data insights, again, to Abina, and these are charged at an extra fee. Again, it's still part of our sort of telemedicine offering, but we've tiered it in a way that you want, Abina to come in, taste the product at the most basic level, and then we can keep making additional revenue as we go along. So you really need to think about what this is for you, because if you get this ladder right, what it then means is that you have a multitude of different types of customers at different levels, and it provides your business development team with such a great pipeline of different types of customers at different levels. And if you're talking about lifetime value, this is such a great platform to think about it, because then you're not stuck on one price, which sometimes can be sometimes of a red herring if you don't get it right. So again, reflection on your part, how many layers of pricing can you generate for your product portfolio? The more the better. But even if you have one or two, it's a good place to start. Just don't have one on its own. That would be, the baseline there. And then just coming to the end of pricing and just thinking about, the impact it has. And we talked about this at the beginning. It's just thinking about pricing along certain levels. And this is the impact it has, of course, on revenue. If you don't get, especially cash flow, if you don't get your pricing right, not only does it affect your revenue, not only does it affect your profitability, but also cash flow as well. You don't want to get your positioning wrong, so that's something to consider. If customer acquisition is something that you're dead set on, you may want to think about pricing that allows you to bring in as many customers as possible. It's okay as long as you have a second plan and a third plan. Again, just going back to the ladder of products or the ladder of pricing that we talked about. Being adaptable. Of course, pricing needs to be flexible. Again, your customer is dynamic. They're not going to stay the same. So you need to develop pricing that, is realistic and reflects where the market is, especially if you are targeting customers in multiple markets, multiple countries, just something to think about. And of course, viability. We want to be sustainable. We want to achieve longevity. We want to be here in the long run. So you need to get your pricing right from the get-go. So these are some assumptions that you can then develop if you get your pricing right. And a lot of these assumptions will make it into your pitch deck eventually. You'll see that as we continue through the journey and as we move into Masterclass 4, especially. So you can then determine market demand, competitive landscape, of course, market sizing. And again, these are affected by many things, but also pricing is one of them. You've got market trends, customer behavior, distribution channels, price sensitivity, and this is something I guess we'll need to test as we go along, market entry, your regulatory environment, and lastly, market segmentation. So these are assumptions that as you move into Masterclass 4, these are aspects that we will come back to and we'll reflect back on this discussion we're having here, because we are going to base our thinking based on the pricing work that you will have done in Masterclass 2. So just again, if you haven't had time to go back into your info packet, you'll find the developing pricing tools there. You can play around with them together with your team and just try to get a sense of what does pricing mean for us? What does it mean for our company? What are different scenarios that we can do? There's an Excel there that you can use, a very simple one that allows you to just get that elementary goal. But also if you're a lot more complex, then there are a few other tools that we will include as we go along, especially as we move into Masterclass 4. Next, we want to move into go-to-market, storytelling, and ESG. Again, like I mentioned at the beginning, what you'll see is all these aspects are interlinked. You cannot tackle pricing, for example, without thinking about storytelling. And I always love this statistic. Only 1.4% of all books on Amazon, for example, are written by Africans, right? And that's something that we need to reflect on. We are just not good storytellers. How can we become better storytellers? And as entrepreneurs, we don't have a choice. We have to be excellent storytellers, regardless of the sector we're in. Because whether you're talking to an investor, you're talking to a customer, you're talking to other stakeholders like government, we need to figure out how we position ourselves, and storytelling is a great platform to do that. But to begin the journey, let's think about sales strategy. And one of the things I want to do at the beginning, if you jump into your info packet, you'll find the B2B versus B2C comparison around how to develop a sales strategy framework. You'll find in B2B, we talk a little more about things like IMAP, which is a mapping tool to map an organization and all the roles within it and create a strategy around that. And B2C is more around how to build a pipeline geared towards B2C. Either way, we're thinking about both sections because a lot of you cover both actually. So you should be good if you go into that. But just to provide just some insights. When we think about sales, especially the health tech space, of course, the first thing we want to do is go back to our masterclass one and just make sure that we've got our persona and problem centered, and our product is on the right track. But also something else is partnership thinking, and we'll talk about that shortly. You have to think about it from a partnership perspective, because if you want to move faster, you want to move quicker, you want to move with a lot more speed and maybe even more cost efficiently, you have to think about partners. And partners can really create a shortcut around how you go to market, but you need to do it in the right way. And to do that, we just need to reflect shortly around, maybe for some of us who are already in the market, why isn't our sales strategy delivering numbers? Because the beauty about sales is there's many ways to measure sales, but ultimately it's a number, right? How many dollars did we bring in? And you can talk about different ways of cutting it and saying, let's look at pipeline, let's look at this, but ultimately it's just about numbers. And you'll hear this whether you're talking about investors or whether you're talking about your own advisory board or your boards, your main board, these is critical. So just some few items here to look at. You may be talking to a B2B persona that is extremely bureaucratic, where they have multiple decision-making processes. And if that's the case, then you really need to think about your persona and how to pivot around that. Sometimes you may be delivering sales, but again, you have a regulatory constraint that allows you to scale at a much slower pace. We'll get to Masterclass 5 and touch on that. Maybe there's a lot of education required in order to get your customer to actually start, using the product. In fact, we've, bumped into a few cases where you have very high sales, but very low usage, right? Let me repeat that. Very high sales where customers are buying your product or service, whatever it may be, but the usage is very low because the education required is very high, which then means sometimes it becomes very difficult to get repeat purchases because they didn't see any value for whatever reason, that may be. You may also encounter resistance to change. Again, that may be linked to education, and again, it just makes it a lot more difficult. So you may want to navigate either through that or away from that, especially if it's really slowing you down. Technical complexity, long sales cycles, especially if you have a clinical validation requirement, again, that could really slow you down. And for some of us who touch on multiple of these items, the one thing that you really need to reflect back on is the pricing ladder, because what that will do is that you won't be solely focused on just one way of generating revenue. You'll have thought about 3, 4, 5 different ways. That way, even if you have a regulatory complexity or hindrance that's slowing you down, maybe you've got 1 or 2 things like training that really gets you some revenue as you're working on maybe some of the more complex things. So again, go back into your info packet. You can always reflect on this and just see together with your team, why aren't our numbers coming through? So food for thought there. So again, just different ways to think about sales strategy. Again, we've tackled most of this from Masterclass 1, but I'll repeat. We've got to develop a persona. Again, we need to think about storytelling. We need to align to the customer journey map, which we developed in Masterclass 1. You'll need a CRM, especially if you're in B2C. But again, I always say if you're tackling B2B as well, you might as well get a CRM because it gets really complex if you do it properly, especially if you follow the framework we've recommended on iMapping. You need to focus on lifetime value. Again, the pricing ladder comes back because if you're thinking about lifetime value, it's not just about the first transaction, you're thinking about multiple transactions. Technical sales force will matter. And again, depending on what it is that you're doing, you may need to reduce the education gap. Think about how you can do that because as you can see, for our space, which is health tech, it really, really affects us in a big way. You'll need a sales funnel. And lastly, you need to know your decision makers. So just some tidbits on some of the areas that have already been covered in the info packet. But again, you're free to ask questions if not clear. One of the last things I want to talk about in terms of sales is thinking about, especially for some of you who are B2B focused, I just wanted to spend some time talking about this. You need to think about, the different levels of who is buying. And again, this is not news to you, but then you need to be intentional about it and actually start tracking this, for example, in a CRM, because we want to make sure that we institutionalize the knowledge around selling or going to market so that it's not just vested in you as the CEO, for example, or you as a sales manager. You want the entire organization to be customer facing, especially if you're in the early days, right? You don't have the luxury of saying, those are the sales focused people and I'm a product person. You want to try and make sure you orient the entire organization to be customer facing. So these are just some thoughts. You need to be careful about who are the technical buyers, who are the financial buyers and the user buyers as well, because all of them have different needs. You need to think about their requirements a little differently. And I always like saying, once you identify the problem, each of these is off center. The problem becomes the center, and each of these you're just trying to go off center, but not creating new problems or new pain points. And once you use this, it really makes you reflect, and you'll see that if you use this thinking with some of the opportunities that you've been struggling to close, if you're in B2B, for example, you'll realize where you went wrong. You are either too leaning towards technical buyers, or maybe you are just focused on the financial buyers, or a hybrid of all of them, right? So again, an opportunity to reflect and see what we can do. And then you've got this pipeline here, again, that will be critical for your sales strategy tracking. And this could be used for both B2B and B2C. Again, a pipeline is such a great way of tracking your numbers because at every stage there is a number. You want to start off, of course, at the top with the leads, and you can go all the way, of course, to closed. And at each point, you're funneling down, isn't it? And you've seen this number here, this 5x here. And it's a grand rule. And again, you can twist it for your organization. But if your sales goal is $1 million, you want to have $5 million, which is 5x or 5 times the leads at the top of the funnel. And this will be different for different sectors. But if you don't have an X, if you don't have that coefficient there, you might just want to start with 5x and improve it as you go along. If you have an excellent sales strategy, excellent sales team, you might even have 2 or 3x. If you do not have a very good, again, sales team, if don't have an optimum sales strategy, you might even end up 6, 7, even up to 10x. Again, we talk about pipeline health, so it's a great way to track how well your sales strategy is delivering. So again, we talked about the idea of partnerships. And again, if you go to your info packet, you'll find this information there. And it's how to think about partnerships and why they matter. So let's talk about that for a second. So we talked about partnerships being able to help us accelerate tech development, but also going to market. They can reduce costs to serve or costs to reach that market. There's also faster deployment of solutions depending on what it is that you're doing. And this is the big one for me, right? Which is the idea of reducing inertia of new solution development, because you, again, don't want to spend too much time in the lab, too much time cooking or building your product and not enough time out there in the market. Is there a partner who has already garnered one side of your market and you can work together, to get that going? And to help you sort of develop a partnership, we gave you a sort of a framework you can use to do this, and it's got 5 steps. And I always like to say, for every person here who has a partnership, you can even use this to evaluate how successful your partnership actually is. And it's got 5 levels. So the first one is, why do you need that partner? A very simple question. Why do you need a partner? It could be they'll help me with sales. It could be they'll help me with marketing. It could be they'll help me with product development. It could be whatever it is that you require. And this is usually informed by a gap that you have. It would also help to name the actual partner if you're thinking about this at this stage. Second thing is, what do we need from this partner in order to deliver value to your persona? So being very deliberate about, we're looking for business development support in BOP areas in a rural village in this place, for example. The third question is, why does the partner need you? Again, it seems like a very simple question, but this is where most partnerships collapse. You need clarity around, why does the partner value you? And if you don't have a clear answer here, it's time to pause, pack up, look for a new partner, because then it will always be lopsided and that partnership will not work. And then number 4 is, what are the main steps to get the partnership to life? And it needs to be 3-4 bullet points, something very simple. Maybe it starts off with a meeting, an MOU, something, and you end up closing the partnership. But again, if there's no clarity on the steps to bring the partnership to life, that's why sometimes you find partnerships that have been 6 months in the making and they're not yet even out there live. And then lastly, and this is, I think, the most critical, is what is the desired picture of success? And usually, I always say, try and make this a number, a dollar value, or number of customers, something like that, something that is easy to measure, but it needs to be something that is joint, not something that you want and something that they want. Find a joint partnership goal. If you're not able to answer these 5 questions for any partnership that you have or any partnership that you desire to have, there's a reason that it will not work. You need to make sure that it ticks all these boxes. And it's a great sort of conversation starter, so that when you meet for your first partnership meeting, you have this canvas and you go through it together, right? So again, this is available in the packet. So as you can see, we created one based on Abina, and just trying to see how we can create a partnership. We partnered with a data tech company because we wanted to see how to leverage the data that we're collecting from Abina and others. But again, what it is for you may, of course, will be different. So you might need to think about what that is for you. Now let's talk about positioning. And just before we talk about storytelling, we'll talk about positioning for a second. And there's this little triangle here that I really like. I think it's such a fantastic way of thinking holistically about positioning, and not so much from a marketing perspective, because when you talk about positioning, people immediately reflect back and say that's a marketing thing. But I want to just guide you through this. This is called the 30 elements of value. This was developed by Harvard and Bain and Company, I think, a few years ago, where they profiled 10,000 companies. They asked them different things: big companies, small companies, government, in emerging markets, in developed markets, and they came up with these 30 elements that were built around sort of the 30, the Maslow's hierarchy. And it has 4 levels. So you can see it's got the functional level there, it's got the emotional level there, you've got life-changing, and then you've got social impact. Now, how it works is that most businesses especially in developing markets, will be at a functional level, which means that if I look at your communications, if I look at the way you talk, if I look at everything about your business, your company, you talk about things like organizing, reducing effort, saving money, making money, connecting. These are the things that come out in your communication. They come out in the way you position yourself. And there's nothing wrong with that. However, companies that remain at the functional level are highly replicable, meaning that a competitor with more money, more muscle can tomorrow morning wake up and replace you almost overnight. And we've seen that in practice, haven't we? Where, you're talking about, for example, saving time. Yeah, you're saving time, that's great. But somebody else with a bit more money and maybe a bit more resource pool can do that faster than you. So what we want to do as health tech businesses is move up the triangle. We want to move to emotional level where we're now talking about badge value, we're talking about rewarding, we're talking about aesthetics, attractiveness, providing access. And the higher you go, the less replicable you are as a business, the higher your margins are, and the higher your profitability is. Right? So let me repeat that. The higher you are in the triangle, the higher you position yourself, the higher the margins you have, the more likely you are to be profitable, right? And of course, increases your chances of longevity, which is what we want. So I want you to think about these 30 elements as an exercise of a journey of sorts. So we're not saying that from tomorrow we want to be at, for example, life-changing level, because there are very few companies in the world that are probably at social impact and life-changing. But we want to be realistic about where we are. And for a lot of us, it will be at the functional level. How do we want to transition upwards? So just food for thought as we, go through these master classes. And again, you can always go back to the info packet and find a lot more information and a practice example, which will force you to think about what it is for you. Now, I can see a few questions. If it's okay, what I'll do is come back at the end and tackle them all together. So just throw your questions in the chat and I'll come back to them shortly as we conclude the slide. So when you think about brand building and storytelling, in your info packet, we went back to the customer journey map, which is such a fantastic way of thinking through storytelling, because at each stage of a customer's journey, we want to tell a different story, right? We want to try and influence them away from awareness to consider us, to buy us, and then to come back, right? So as a business, it provides us with such a simple framework to think about storytelling, regardless of whether you have a background in marketing or storytelling or whatever. It is such a simple platform to use because as an entrepreneur, you need to be thinking about storytelling more intentionally across these stages, because this is how we make sure that they come in. This is how we make sure that they stay with us. This is how we make sure that they prefer us to the competitors. And this is how we make sure that they come back, right? So just food for thought there around storytelling. We also provided you with this sort of template here, which is a storytelling template. It is a fantastic, simple way to think about brand building and storytelling. So if you look at all this to the left here, so number 1 to 5 is centered around your brand. So again, critical questions around how do you want to position yourself? How do you see yourself? And then number 6 all the way to 11, more around storytelling and figuring out how to make sure that we are telling coherent stories that are linked to our brand. But also back to positioning, right? You'll see that everything now is trying to link together back to positioning. If you want to move, for example, higher up the triangle, I wouldn't want to see your top 5 messages be about how you connect and save people money. That should just be something that you do, right? You may want to talk about, the social impact you create, and that's something that maybe your persona cares about, and that will move you up the triangle over time. So again, back into your info packet, you'll find this exercise that we had here that will help you think through your brand and your storytelling. That's something that you don't even have to be a marketing person to really use, right? I'm just going to rush over the last few because of time so that we can get some questions going. Around ESG is something that you're not hearing for the first time. Again, environmental, social, and governance. It's an emerging area, it's an emerging theme that will cut across all sectors, and it is here with us in the health tech space. So what we try to do in the packet is we gave you some actual examples for each pillar. So if it's environmental, we actually gave you 4 or 5 examples of environmental agendas that you could choose, social and governance as well. And what you want to try is start finding a way to actively develop them into your strategy so that it's not an afterthought. It's not something that you're doing after you have done everything else. You want to try and make sure that ESG is part of it. And the reason for that is it will come a time when, as part of your financial reporting, and this is of course required for very large companies and public companies, they're required to provide ESG reporting as well, right? Or already, depending on the investor you're talking to, this is already a requirement. So it's not a luxury anymore. We need to find a way to make sure that we incorporate ESG into our strategy, into the way we are positioning ourselves, into how we go to market, so that it is a part and parcel of everything that we're doing. Now, towards the end, I just want to talk about 2 last concepts, and then we can get some questions going. The first thing I want to talk about is testing, which is something that you all need to think about. The idea of testing and validating as we move along. Now, we're firmly now into Masterclass 2, but we've got a long journey all the way to Masterclass 5. And there are 5 areas I want you guys to start thinking about testing. So the first one is problem validation, which is something that, of course, we have talked about. So problem and solution validation is where you're going back to your customer. You're trying to get a feel of, are you ticking the right boxes? There's also market validation, where now overall you're looking at your sales, how are the numbers looking? Sometimes it's one thing to be validated as a problem and solution where, your persona gives you the thumbs up, but then, what are the numbers looking like? We want to make sure that, the sales numbers are reflective. Feasibility is more internal, where you're looking at your internal capacity, your internal resource pool, and you're trying to ask yourself, do we actually have the resources to deliver this innovation? And then lastly, business value. Ultimately, you're looking at your EBITDA here. I always like to say, you look down at that number, it should really tell you how tall your trees are. You're looking at profitability basically, and you want to see, is it sustainable? So these are the 5 tests that you should be running concurrently as we go through the master classes, because these are questions that not only will your investor be asking, but also your board, your advisory board, they'll be constantly asking you about this. So we want to make sure that we are on top of those as we go ahead. Now, lastly, I want to talk about a CRM, and I talked about the idea of making sure that we can track our performance and track how we are doing. I want to talk about why we need a CRM, and maybe just the types of CRMs. Again, you can see these are the different types of CRMs that you can get out there. Now, the most exciting thing I would say is today, a lot of CRMs off the shelf you can get for $5, $10, $20 per user, incorporate all the types of CRMs you can see here. So a lot of it nowadays is, do you really need to build a CRM from scratch, or can you actually incorporate some existing CRMs from the get-go? Right? So just food for thought there before you invest in a CRM. But I want to talk about specifically, and again, all this is available in your info packet. I want to talk about what are the most critical features to look for in a CRM. And the 2 most important, I would say, is availability on mobile, because you want to be able to empower your sales force, your technical sales teams to go out there and market and position yourself. But also offline capability, if possible, depending on what it is that you're doing. You want a platform that is accessible on offline. And some of the great CRMs that are, again, available for $10, $15 a pop are available offline. So you want to make sure that you have a CRM that supports those 2. Those are very sort of, I would say, Africa-centered issues to think about may not really be an issue if you're in a Western market, but those two I would say are critical just because of the health tech space we're in. We may be operating in markets um, that are a bit more inaccessible. So I just want to pause there, Emmanuel, and just get some questions going before maybe we talk about anything else. I would welcome some questions. Maybe I could just read some of them in the chat here.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay, Herbert, and thanks for that presentation. I saw Martin Macau's hand raised. As you read those on the chat, maybe Martin, do you want to unmute and ask the question that you had or make a comment?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, my hand wasn't raised. I was just doing a thumbs up when you asked if you can hear him.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yeah.
We can. All right. We can look at questions on the chat.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I can see a question here from Nyoni. I hope I got that right. What is the recommended time for free trial period, especially for guys in freemium? My assumption is you have some kind of a platform, some kind of an app, something like that you want your customers to access for a short period of time and then find a way to monetize. So the question here is time. How long? That's a difficult question because it really depends on what it is that you're doing. But what I would say is if you have mapped out, and maybe I'll just go back here for a second. If you have mapped out your customer journey, you may actually want to intentionally put some times so that it's not left in the open. I don't know where that slide is anymore. But anyway, I had that customer journey slide. You may want to just say, to move from, say, freemium, let's say, to the next stage, I'm going to set a timeline of 45 days. And you're tracking that in a CRM. Again, that's why you need a CRM because if you have 10 customers, that's fine. That's easy to do. If you have 1,500 customers, who remembers where the last 15 days was or the first 30 days? So you may want to intentionally set a time. And if they don't renew or they don't move to the next stage of what it is that you want to do, if they don't move away from the freemium plan, it may be a reflection on the value. Maybe they don't see value. And also you may want to be talking to them at the same time. So just set a time and then use that as a test as well. Yeah. Yeah, Greg, I can see your hand up there. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask the free trial period. Does it make sense to put your free time range that is fair enough to say that the customer would have been able to get some value? How frequently do you think a customer needs this service? Then that should determine the free period we give them.
Yep.
And that's probably going to make them upgrade when they.
Yeah. So thanks for that, Greg. I think you were breaking up, but I think I got the gist of what you were asking. Yeah, again, and that's what I was saying. It really depends on what it is that you're doing. You may want to make sure that, for example, what it is that you're offering for free, the free portion of your service, is something that potentially can remain free forever. And that's one thing to think about. It doesn't have to be. But what that does is that you're not overly obsessed with killing them off, right? You want to make sure that they're still in your portfolio because ultimately, whether they're paying or not, they're still your customers. They're just at a different stage. So just food for thought there. You may want to carve off a portion of your product or service that maybe can remain free forever, but also like Greg is saying, it's based on how long it takes for them to taste or eat or consume or experience the service, right? All right, great. Yeah, next question is from Greg. Oh yeah, Greg. Again, you were talking about partnership. Does partnership point number 5 for our persona Abina carry a joint partnership goal? I missed that. I need to check on that, but I think it did. because one of the things we were very keen on, and I can just quickly check on that, is you need to have a joint goal that is monetary. Just 1 second. Here we go. Let me see. Yeah, you're right. You're right, Greg. So even with this, it didn't quite have the joint goal. It still had sort of concern and data tech solutions separately. Thanks for that catch. Great student, Greg. We need to have a joint offering. But I think what we had attempted to do is this 20% here, this 20% reduction in health-related issues, sort of as the joint goal. But sometimes percentages are hard to measure because it depends on where we are coming from. I'll go for a number goal, so maybe number of customers or a dollar value. So thanks for that, Greg. All right, any other questions
or comments for that matter?
or comments?
I know we are like 1 minute past time.
Would you be kind enough to give us an example in this case?
In the case of Abina?
Concern and data tech, yeah, with Abina as the
Yeah, so for example, in this case, we might want to say as a joint partnership, we might want to generate $250,000 worth of sales from the Abina persona. Again, Abina is just representative. It could be 10,000 Abinas that we're looking at as this service, right? That could be one way to look at it. Or it might be to generate data models, to generate a joint data model that we can commercialize. That could also be another goal that has maybe 1 million data sets, right? So for example, that could be something that we pursue. It could really be anything as long as it's something that you jointly can agree on. Something that is inspirational and something that is useful for both of you, right? There's a comment here from Matt. Will the slides be shared? Yes, the slides should be available, Emmanuel, right?
Yes, they will be available to everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, this is the slides I was going through are sort of redacted, cut down version. The original version is probably twice this size, has a lot more detail, and you can, get, especially if you want to share with your teams who are maybe not able to join this call as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Herbert. For a nice presentation. And thanks, team, for the engagement. In case you have any further questions, feel free to still reach out to us or through your portfolio manager, and we'll be able to support you on that. If you need someone to work with you on any of the topics we've discussed today, also reach out as well. But otherwise, I know we are past time. I'd want to give you back. I would want us to just end it at that, and wish you a good rest of your day, evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you so much for joining, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you. Oh, by the way, as you drop out, please remember to go to Babel. All this information is actually on Babel. You can dive deeper there and get more details. Like Herbert said, this is just a summary of what we have online on Babel. Thanks, and have a good evening. Bye-bye.